What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So the whiteboards are back. There's two. Okay, so check this out. Since I started messing with dots and that kind of stuff, and since I started putting that on camera, so the amount of time that I've messed with dots versus the amount of time that it's been on camera is kind of skewed a little bit. But I've gotten a whole bunch of retarded comments, and two, people would send me retarded videos and everything else from a litany of sources that have a lot to say about things that they genuinely don't get. Now, here's the thing, make no mistake, okay? This all comes from people who are inexperienced on the item, even though they want to act like they do. Okay, a couple of classes with a dot on a handgun does not mean I am well versed at this at all. That's one. Two, the other one is always people approaching this with some sort of bias in the first place. Okay, they have a particular way that they want to do things, and they have a particular way that they want to sell themselves to people or whatever. The big thing here is that they're not using adequate amounts of data. They're not actually going at this with correct knowledge seeking, and that is let the evidence overwhelm what's going on in your brain. Because a lot of these things I individually thought about dots to start too. Now, this is listed as the big dumb, because, and I'm listed on a bunch of these too, because when I first started out on dots, I used to think a lot of these. Because for those of you that have not been tracking it and everything else, like I started seriously training like a little over a decade ago, and this is tens on tens of thousands of rounds fired per year from that point all the way out to where we're at now. And this is on a lot of different action types. Like I used to shoot a lot of 45 and single stack 1911. Obviously, you guys know that I'm used to shooting the soulless blasters, Glocks. And just a variety of other things. And for those of you that have been paying attention on like social media and everything else, lately I started getting back into the double single action game. This is a 229, and I'm likely going to dot it and comp it and everything else, so it brings it out to the same length as the light, and that's going to make a lot of people really upset. That's cool to me. Point is, though, is that, listen, I had a lot of time on irons, right? And I used to think a lot of these things as well. And the weird part is that as I went up through like the development of a pistol mounted or a slide mounted dot, I saw all of the issues that they had, right? For instance, the Type 1 RMR, which was made for submachine guns and shit like that, started getting mounted via like Boresight Solutions or whoever else was cutting slides at the time on the Glocks, and you start having terminal issues because there was like a single contact point that would mate with the battery, and that would start getting bent out of the way. So people would have to makeshift ways to turn that into a solid solution for what it was that they were doing, and it was kind of a pain in the ass. So that warded me off of dots, never mind the fact that a lot of other things like cost and everything else, throwing out one in particular handgun, which felt like an experiment at the time. But as time has gone on, and as more people caught on to this, and as more people did more debugging, and the Type 2 RMR comes out, and then a whole bunch of other people are coming out with really solid solutions for dots on handguns, like Holosun, for instance, a lot of these issues have vanished, right? So, but we're still going to go through all of this. And the first one that isn't listed on here is actually something that I thought for a while too, and that is, well, if dots were reliable on handguns, somebody in the military would have gone to them in mass a while ago. And then, of course, when you start applying, any real critical thinking to this kind of deal, number one, the military in general just does not use handguns very much. Okay, one of the reasons why I'm actually doing an extended format review on the 229 and that kind of stuff is mostly because it was a handgun contracted into the United States military that never really got shot a whole lot in any volume. Yeah, and it's got a reputation and everything else, but we understand, like, military does not shoot handguns very much at all. So the investment to cut and then mount dots on to handguns and everything else, it makes sense that that's not a thing that gets done, except for guys that are in particular job titles. And if that's the case, they're just going to get whatever in the hell they want. bring a slide in that's already cut, mount that to a frame, go. You know, like that's not very difficult. So here's one thing. You know, look, a lot of people sit there and will talk about like co-witnessing their dots and how they have to stay co-witnessed. And some people go on to say that you have to get a particular like suppressor height sight that will match into the center of your glass, so that's obscuring the glass, which is also another pain in front of your face, and this is all this other shit that gets in your way, blah, blah, blah. They're two separate sighting systems on purpose. Just like a dot on a rifle, if you figure that your irons are zeroed and then you bring your dot to where the irons are mated up and then call it good, everybody's going to laugh you out of the room. It's the same concept here. That one's actually pretty simple to handle. You know, get lower profile suppressor height sights, get them low, out of your way, out of your glass. If you absolutely need them, cool, go to them. But they're two separate sighting systems, and for guys that have dots, you really do want to dope both. Okay. And yeah, a lot of people get kind of weird when you say things like dope and equate that to handgun stuff, but that is still a fact. You have to know where these sights will impact at various distances with various ammos, including your carry ammunition. This is all stuff that you individually have to do. So there's that. The next one. This actually covers a little more than it would seem. Okay. Because there are folks out there that have said things like, there's no real advantage to a dot up close. What does up close really mean? Okay. Because typically when these people start talking about this kind of thing, they're sitting there like, oh yeah, at distance, you can hit stuff, you laser beam things, fucking blah, 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 right? What they don't talk about is these particular ranges, right? So when people start talking about, any other reasonable distance, they're starting to talk about like 7 yards and forward of 7 yards, the dot's the king, right? Because it's much easier to do all kinds of stuff. You can keep a target focus, great, cool, awesome. But then they start talking about like 3 yards, okay, which as far as training goes, once you hit a certain point, doing pretty much anything at 3 yards is like a masturbatory distance, okay? Everybody can do it. Everybody can do it really well. Everybody can look like Jesus incarnate with a handgun at 3. And then they start talking about how there's no real advantage on a dot mounted to a handgun versus a set of irons at that distance. Well, of course not. There really isn't. And the reason why that there isn't is because if you are training not like a fucking idiot, okay, your hand-eye coordination does about 99% of everything required to deliver that shot. And if we're talking about an entire human being, okay, this really is one of those hard target focus deals where you hand-eye coordination a handgun into place and you start pressing rounds at that guy. And that is something that you need to be able to develop individually. Some people are going to reference that as point shooting. I would say that that's slightly different because this isn't coming straight off the hip and shooting like so. This is guided pistol fire with a hard target focus on the thing that you intend to shoot at, and it is absolutely something that you have to develop between your hand-eye coordination. Where you learn these kinds of things is when you go to classes that will actually teach this kind of stuff. Okay, I'm not the only one that does either. So at these masturbatory distances, there isn't really that much of an advantage, sure, but that's because most of what you're doing at that distance has nothing to do with the sighting system whatsoever. Probably the best thing that I've ever heard about handguns and sighting systems and everything else is that your body is doing the aiming for a handgun. Your sights are just to check on that work. You see what I'm saying? Like, so that doesn't make all that much sense to sit there and be like, oh, therefore I don't recommend them because up close there isn't a real advantage. But then they listed all these other reasons why a dot's got an advantage at anything past that masturbatory distance, right? Even worse than that, a lot of times people will quote this, to me, magic statistic that says 3 yards, 3 seconds, 3 rounds as like the average for self-defense shootings and that kind of stuff. Those of you that have really taken this seriously and that have watched thousands on thousands of hours of shootings, whether it's individual self-defense or police or whatever, right? Because those two are like the vast majority of what I'm dealing with as far as what I'm paying attention to when I watch shootings, because most of this involves handgun. Okay, as far as those shootings go, in about half a second, that 3 yards or less is increased dramatically because people are trying to get the fuck up out of there. That's number one. Number two, 3 rounds, I don't even know where that comes from, really, because like almost every cop that you see start going through that panic cadence of fire, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that panic cadence of fire. The funny thing is that I didn't stop at 3, did I? I stopped at 5. That seems to be like the minimum for guys that are in consistent handgun shootings on a regular basis. Those are police officers, right? And people that don't wear a back belt every day, they're very much the same because they're panicking. Something is trying to actually gravely hurt or kill them, and they go into panic rate of fire at panic rate of fire speeds for a little longer than 3 friggin' rounds. And it's not a super uncommon thing to see someone that's that scared dealing with somebody that either doesn't give a shit because of adrenaline or doesn't give a shit because of drugs or both. Just keep on coming while that dude is just dropping handgun ammunition into that guy. It's not the most uncommon thing in the world to see someone drop an entire magazine into somebody. Okay, so as far as your individual training and that kind of stuff is concerned, abiding by the 3 rounds, 3 seconds, and 3 yards deal doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you're backpedaling. That person's trying to come forward. There's always that slinky effect that's going on. And the whole time that he's stood up and coming at you, you're blasting rounds at this guy, right? So your individual training should absolutely be cognizant of this kind of stuff because every round that you fire is 100% has a receipt attached to it. So if you're going to be accountable for all that stuff, why would you not want the better sighting system in the first place? Okay, the one that allows you to pay attention to your target area, because that's how reflex sights work, is where you keep both eyes open on the target area and you superimpose the dot into your vision versus paying attention to the dot itself. Okay, there's a lot of techniques that help out with that kind of thing, but this isn't a training video. This is me making fun of idiots. So none of that makes any real sense. Okay, especially if you start watching a lot of self-defense shootings or whatever, you know, once you start going all the way down the rabbit hole and just start watching shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting, the 3 rounds, 3 yards, 3 seconds thing makes no fucking sense at all. So, absolutely retarded. And this, no real advantage up close. I don't even understand why that would then be used, like I said, as a reason to not put a dot on a handgun. Because, and this is just a fact, the more that you increase a reasonable distance for anything, not just a handgun, it gets dramatically more difficult to consistently hit at really high tempos. Okay, from 5 to 10 yards, it is significantly more difficult to hit exactly what the fuck it is that you're shooting at. Okay, that is 5 whole paces. Why would I not want a better sighting system that doesn't obscure the target area more, that gives me more feedback on what it is that I'm doing, when that is exactly the case? Because handguns suck at everything. Okay, and I recognize a lot of you watching this video and that kind of stuff, I'm preaching to the converted. Again, this is more for us to make fun of those idiots, right? So there's that. This one's funny. Reduces overall aptitude, right? So you have these pompous fucks that jump behind a camera or into a little comment section, beginning everything that they have to say with dots on handguns with the venerable, well, actually. And they start talking about how people do so much worse when you put them on dots for a while and then you put them on a set of irons. Anybody that's put an honest effort toward seriously training, I mean constantly drawing from a holster, which, by the way, you never tend to see these fucks draw from a holster when they start talking shit about dots on handguns. It's a whole other thing, right? And they also tend to be anti-shot timer people, which is also fucking hilarious. Because how do you know, okay, if there isn't some sort of scoring system there, if there isn't times to individually track with that scoring system, if you're not monitoring hits, misses, if you're not monitoring standards of time as far as what I'm allowed to get away with getting out of a holster onto a target and blowing around at something, how do you know first thing other than you've seen them miss a couple of times, therefore they're worse than they were before? Well, first thing, of course, if you put a dot on a rifle and hand that to somebody, and then you put a set of iron sights on a rifle and hand that to somebody, they're going to do worse with an inferior sighting system. It's just going to happen. It's slower, it obscures shit in the target area, and as you know, by the way, it's so much harder to do well up close and really fast with a set of irons, even though there are techniques to help push those irons up significantly faster than how most people would use them. Of course they do worse. It's a worse sighting system. Now, if we're talking about the ease of how someone gets into a set of irons or a dot or whatever, I would say the exact opposite is true, because I have shot a stupid number of rounds with a set of irons on handguns and that kind of stuff. And for a while, I actually really was the kind of person that was just kind of like, nah, fuck dots on handguns. I don't need that. I can run people over and that kind of stuff. Okay, whatever, fine. But here's the deal, right? When I first started messing around with dots, one of the reasons why I was just like, no, was because it was showing me everything I was not very good at and making work versus things I actually should be paying attention to. Anybody that's drawn a handgun and just not had the dot appear at all, right? Or now we have newer dots on handguns, like the ACSS Vulcan, which will show you a big, giant, freaking red line that shows you, hey, you suck, move this over. Okay, that's happened a lot. Or if you get into a goofy position, or if you start shooting faster and the dot just goes from here to way the fuck up toward Jesus someplace and you have no idea where it is, or if you start shooting on the move and the same thing happens. Point is that is significantly more difficult to do right out the gate than with a set of irons, because it requires you to actually be good. You have to have solid recoil control down. You have to. Okay, you have to have good holster presentation and that kind of stuff down, or it's going to drag you by constantly making you have to fish around for dots and do crap like that. Okay, and the funny thing is that, gee willikers, it's a thing that forces you to be better. Therefore, when we go from a thing that makes you refine those mechanics and then go to a set of iron sights, which are very, very coarse, okay, and very few are adjustable, and for those that are adjustable, they tend to be very fragile. I say tend to be because there are some tough ones out there. Well, how does that even make any sense? Okay, and as for instance, right, like we have a scoring system at the schoolhouse that I use. It's not like a qualification or anything. We literally call it the gauge. Okay, and to summarize this drill, okay, it's a 40 round thing, 200 points total. There's a huge penalty system that all stacks and blah blah blah, right? And generally speaking, guys that are on dots consistently, right, a lot of them will bring out a set of iron sights on a pistol only to see where they're at on that. And typically speaking, especially for guys that are well practiced, there's a 10-point drop. Like for instance, guys that are shooting like 170s and 160s and shit like that, they'll typically drop to 160 or 150 something respectively, right? So, and as a matter of fact, I kind of stacked all the difficulty onto this, right? Because I'm used to dots, I'm used to compensators, and I'm very spoiled. And then I go to a 229, which is a double single action handgun. There's two different trigger pulls in there. And the last time that I shot this was like, Wednesday, something like that. It started getting real cold outside. Out here in friggin' Tennessee, this is when a lot of the sleet was coming down, and this is very recent. So I'm cold, I have gloves on, I have equipment on because I'm cold, you know, like I've got like armor and that kind of stuff on, specifically because it's cold as shit. And I got gloves on and everything else, with an iron-sighted handgun that's not compensated and everything else. And I went from where I normally average with a dotted and compensated handgun, which is, typically like 170, like high 170s, 180s, things like that. And there's like a million students that have seen me shoot those numbers, to a 164, right? So stacking on all of those difficulties and everything else, okay, cool. Yeah, sure, fine. But with respect to just a sighting system, it is an inferior sighting system. It's slower, it's more coarse, it covers a lot of target area and that kind of stuff. All right, fine. These are things that you can expect, right? So, what the fuck are you talking about? In addition to this, I'm slower than I am with a dot, but I'm actually better than I was. Okay, because they snap up significantly faster. I haven't had to drift over a front sight and like that last little millisecond and everything else. Because a lot of people that are honest with themselves draw a handgun and line up a set of irons. At the very last second, they'll have to do like a tiny little micro correction in there to make sure everything's good. Okay, that's because you're drawing and it's misaligned, but you don't pay attention to these things. Therefore, the irons are just there. It doesn't make any sense to me how it is that this reduces your aptitude when it forces you to refine mechanical things. And the big deal behind all of this exactly is they have no measurement scale. Therefore, whatever their bias is will just get confirmed by the first person that doesn't shoot well with a set of irons. It's that simple. Okay. Here's a dumb one. A really dumb one, and it's cost. Why would I put rifle money into a handgun, especially, if I carry it every day and all this other shit? First and foremost, I don't care if what I have on my body is an $18,000 piece of equipment. Okay, regularly for like home defense rifles and everything else, it's not uncommon, especially now, to see a $5,000 rifle in somebody's house between their optics, their lights, their rails, their fucking bolt carrier groups, barrels, everything. Put it all together and it's a high quality piece of equipment, cans, everything else. Then you have a $5,000 piece of equipment sitting in the house because the thing that you train with is the thing that you've shot this thing so much, you've replaced barrels, that kind of stuff. And I would gladly give that thing up if I get to live. Okay, a $1,700 handgun that was a soulless plastic blaster a second ago, okay, in other words known as a Glock, right? That doesn't matter to me at all. It doesn't matter to me at all because I get to live. Okay, and then people will sit there and start talking shit about compensators and stuff too, where it's like, well, why would I not want a flatter shooting handgun? Why would I not want a dot that gives me more target information, so when I kick on that light in the middle of my house or in that alley or wherever in the fuck else that you shouldn't have been when something actually went down in the first place. But again, different conversation. Why would I not want more information? Why would I not want better things bolted to the thing that I'm using and training with, right? And then there's these people that will always talk about cost and be like, oh, well, instead of spending $1,700 on a handgun, spend that $600 on that handgun and use the rest of that money for ammo. That is entirely true, sure, for brand new people. But then the first thing that they'll tell them to do with a Glock is to replace the sights because those sights suck. That's the same thought process. It's just scaled up for someone's skill level. Okay, so I don't understand that at all. Because if you're willing to invest alongside your skill set with upgrading the weapon system that you have, okay, and weapon system does entirely mean that, because this isn't just a handgun anymore. Okay, because this is a handgun with a PID device, and the sighting system that I have on it gives me way more than just a projected image in front of my face. It's a training tool because it feeds tons of information into me, because what I see from the dot that's projected on the target area gives me information for what I'm doing right and wrong all at the same time. Okay? The compensator that's out here is keeping the gun nice and flat, even with the defense ammunition that I use. It's as flat as I was using with standard 115 grain ball in this 9mm handgun. That's not important to have the same recoil impulse for the most part as far as vertical, jumping around and that kind of stuff in a handgun. I don't understand people that sit there and say stupid shit like, don't buy gadgets, buy bullets. And then they mount dots to their rifles and compensators and suppressors and lights and all this other shit. Look, we've evolved, significantly so. Stay relevant, stay with the times, don't be the big fucking dumb. This is more of a quippy thing, okay? Night vision trash talk and that kind of stuff. A lot of these guys are just kind of like, yeah, they help out fantastic for the night vision you're never going to buy. Two things. A, especially because I've run a schoolhouse for a few years now, I could sit here and pitch a rock into 100 fucking people that own sets of night vision, between PVS 14s, 31s, or whatever. Okay? That's not uncommon anymore. Okay? We used to be able to talk about that like it was a mythical thing back in the day, similar to short-barreled rifles and stuff that show up at class. That's not a thing anymore. Short-barreled ARs and stuff are everywhere. But then again, back when I started taking classes, 1911s were like 80% of the handguns in class. Okay, things change a lot. They change fast, and when we go into the modern world and that kind of stuff, a lot of people are going to take notice. So tons of people are using night vision now. That's not a non-issue. One. Two, nobody ever talks about the low-light benefits of a dot either. Nobody can sit there and adequately explain to me how a set of backlighted or shaded freaking irons off of the light that you're projecting off of your handgun is better than an independent illumination source from an optic. Not one person ever. Especially if that person has properly monitored the brightness for the light that they have on their gun. And even if it fucking isn't, a super bright dot will give you more target area on a bad guy, okay, than a set of irons will. Even if that whole glass is red, if you're paying attention to the target with your light, because you're IDing the target first, and that whole thing is red, A, I'm not losing that sighting system friggin' ever, because it's the surface of the sun bright, okay? And two, the irons will be lost fast by comparison. When we teach people to shoot low light and with handguns and that kind of stuff, especially on a set of irons, we have to constantly remind people to make sure that their sighting systems or their irons are aligned, because they're paying attention to the target area which is illuminated by their light, and they're having tremendous difficulty making sure that these are actually aligned, because they're paying attention to their front sight post as much as possible, because during the day a high-vis front sight is what most people are using, and that's all they can see. This is blacked out and it's hazy, and a lot of times if the notches are small, they draw a hazed line all the way across in shadow, depending on how eyeballs are taking in light and perceiving things. We have to constantly remind people to keep those things aligned. Okay. There ain't enough parallax problem to not hit a person at 25. There ain't. Okay. As far as if that dot is in the center of the glass like it is here, or way the fuck up over here, if that whole, if it's max brightness, it's stupid bright, and all you're seeing is this giant red image, okay, that you superimposed into your vision with your 1,000 lumen light on or whatever projected over there, and you send that shot, it's gonna hit that plate. It'll hit an A-zone size plate. Ask me how I know. And all you have to do is go check it out for yourself. It'll make your eyeballs hurt, especially if you're light sensitive like I am, but that's nonsense. So the low light thing is what these people never talk about, and that is far and away more advanced than any night sights that you have, which most of the time, especially up close, they get washed out by an 800 plus lumen light. And if it's just a set of black irons, I mean, if you're going to try and compare performance from one to the other, good luck, because it's not even in the same realm. So here's one that I find that's actually hilarious, okay, because it's absolutely false, but again, we're making fun of morons. Well, dots work the same way that irons do, okay? You may see an image projected in front of your face, and you can move it around the glass and that kind of stuff, but really that's an optical illusion, okay? What it really is that it's very similar to a set of irons, because you have an emitter, right, that's projected onto a screen. So that works exactly like a notch in a peep sight. It's just backwards. I know that made no fucking sense, because it doesn't make any goddamn sense at all. They don't work the same. They've never worked the same. And for anyone that's confused as to what I'm even talking about, good on you, because I was as confused when I heard this shit too. No, they fucking don't. Okay, there's several reasons why an emitter of any kind, whether it's an exposed emitter or a closed emitter dot, does not work anywhere near the same as a set of irons do. Because here's the thing. I could line these up. I could shoot accurately with these iron sights. I could shoot consistently with these iron sights. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter how still I appear. You are constantly moving out of alignment with your rear sight. Number one. Number two, it's also not fucking zeroed. That's your irons, that is. But that's okay, okay? If they hit where you want them to hit most of the time, that's fine. But it doesn't matter. You are constantly coming out of alignment between your front and rear sight. Okay? It's just how much are you? With a dot, there's no fucking way you are coming out of alignment between the emitter and what's projected on the screen. You seeing this dot projected somewhere else in this screen is simply a reference point as to where the bore of this son of a bitch is actually pointed versus where you are perceiving that glass, if that makes any sense. And even if it's drifted all the way over to one side or another, you're still going to get a hit. And the further back you start to go, you'll see a little bit of parallax issue and that kind of stuff. But the thing is that you're not coming out of alignment. The alignment between the one and the other is exactly the same all the time, because it's just a projection of light going straight into a screen. You can't, and last time I checked, we're not nearby any massive fucking gravity wells other than the friggin' moon, and last time that I checked that, the moon doesn't disturb the light emission from one source to another. Okay, so that's never coming out of alignment. Ever. Okay, so as far as the difference between lining that up and lining a set of iron sights up, no, they don't fucking work the same. They've never worked the same, and this is a retarded thought. But that's okay. People that are inexperienced, that try to absolutely personify the Dunning-Kruger effect, are going to say dumb shit like this. Here's an old one, but a good one. This is all the way back to rifles. When red dots start coming down on rifles in mass. Well, irons don't run out of battery, and irons don't turn off. On a handgun especially, that's fucking false. Okay? I could be pedantic and say, I've seen tritium vials burn out or fall out. Okay? Like tritium vials just ejecting themselves from iron sights. I've seen that happen a lot. Way more than that, though. In the last 4 years, I lost count of how many front sights we've had to reattach to guns because they're loose, or just got ejected harder than goose into the ether someplace. You know what's never come loose from a handgun slide ever? An RMR. Or honestly, any other dot. Because what you have to understand here is, proportionally speaking, the two screws that are holding this guy into place are absolutely fucking massive. Okay? It's a solid chunk of the proportion of the optic itself. And there's two of them, gripping in 2 threads or greater into the slide itself. Okay? Versus the singular screw bolting a front sight into a Glock slide, for instance, or a front sight that was drifted into a slide, whatever other company that is, And that can wear down over time. Either the dovetail does because it changes out tons of sights, or just the vibrations, no matter how tight that is, can start to drift that sucker over. Even especially when you start making contact with stuff. I've seen optics crack glass, continue to work, and all kinds of other things, but I've never seen them come loose. Ever. I've seen front sights just snap themselves off coming out of friggin' Safariland holsters. Okay, so sure, whatever. And as a note, by the way, irons don't run out of battery. Again, I've seen tritium vials eject themselves out of sights and that kind of stuff before. But if you want your dot to not turn off randomly because it ran out of battery, change the fucking battery. Like, once a year. It's really not that hard. We even have convenient little battery trays now with batteries that are rated for 50,000 hours. This really is not hard, and nobody complains about that on rifles anymore. This is a retarded thing to even consider as a con when you're talking about this with regards to a handgun, and then you have no problems whatsoever putting an Aimpoint Comp M4 or a T2 or a fucking EOTech on your friggin' rifles. Doesn't make any sense. This one's awesome. This one's awesome because I heard a bunch of people chirping this at once, and then I went to the source of how stupid this was, to where it's like, oh well, you can't responsibly shoot at distance with a dot on a handgun, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because I've shot at 200 and 300 yards with 9mm handguns with dots mounted and that kind of stuff before. It's exponentially easier to hit at greater distances with a dot and that kind of stuff. But then I went to the source and I started checking this out, right? And the thought process here was, if your idea of shooting something at a greater distance with a handgun in a self-defense scenario, by the way, this is the whole thought, in a self-defense scenario, is to pick a point above that target and then shoot at that, intending to hit your target, that is wildly irresponsible. And anybody that teaches that is teaching irresponsible stuff. Okay, so, and then after that, technique is talked about, which is actually a real technique for a set of irons, where instead of holding over like so with a set of irons on a pistol to shoot at greater distances like 200 and 300 and that kind of stuff, you're actually canting. You're still doing the holdover, but you're canting the rear, okay, of that handgun, so that you still get the same elevation that you need, you still get the same holdover that you need, but you're using the top edge or your front sight itself to reference off of just somewhere else in this sight channel, either is the base of the sight, the rear sight, or whatever, so that you can get hits at greater distances, so that you're not like covering up all of the target area, can't see nothing, and you're shooting into space somewhere up here. Okay, cool. But then that same thought process is applied to dots. This is hilarious for a number of reasons, because that means that everybody that's taught a holdover with a dot mounted to a fucking rifle is teaching like irresponsibly dangerous shit. No. Okay. And there's several reasons for this. Okay. Number one, the particular example used in this is, dude walked out to his mall and he hit a particular spot in the mall, and that's 300 yards, right? Or meters, or whatever measurement he wanted to use. Okay, let's use the closer one, right? 300 yards. And then it goes, if something were to pop off, I don't know what would happen, but like, I would think that I would have the wherewithal to be able to adequately provide responsible handgun fire so that I can either retreat or advance. And I'm going to full stop this human right here and say that is the dumbest fucking thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Maneuver warfare in a mall is retarded. Okay? Any place where there are other people running around And he even mentions it himself that, 300 for a handgun is absurd, but then he goes into the scenario which doesn't make any fucking sense. But point is that maneuver warfare in a crowded area where there's tons of people to not shoot in a ballistically inferior thing, okay, the flight time, even if it's a good hold, right, let's say that it's a good hold for 300, let's say it's a good hold, let's say it's a good shot, the flight time on that 9mm projectile already makes this fucking irresponsible, because it's going to take 14 years to get there. And an innumerable number of things can change as far as people you don't intend to shoot running in the foreground or background of that particular individual that you are trying to shoot at. So that whole thing is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Now, in addition to this, he starts talking about, for firearm safety rules, right? You don't want to use a dot and hold over a particular target area because obviously, like, the thought process on this, and this is the inexperience of this comment, is that if you're just doing a straight holdover, right, you're covering up the target's foreground all the way, and therefore you don't have, target foreground and background as far as firearm safety rules. And the funny thing is, that's true, okay? But here's the thing, the further back you get with a set of pistol iron sights, that happens all the time. All you have to do is this. Pick a freaking object, okay? Pick an object, for instance, like freaking, like a bird feeder or some shit, like hanging out in your backyard or whatever, right? And if you line up a set of pistol irons on that guy, the first thing that you'll notice is that if you're trying to shoot that bird feeder that's at like 15 or 20 yards or whatever, okay, the first thing that you'll notice is between your front and rear sight, it's covering the entire target area from the thing you're cutting in half down. So you don't have target foreground at all. And most people don't talk about this, right? You don't have target foreground at all. You have your peripheral vision, and you can absolutely extrapolate or assume that if something comes in your periphery, that, okay, that's going into the dude's foreground, I'm going to hold off, right? But the problem with that is that you still don't have foreground, right? So the entire point about, scaling the iron up and everything else, it's like you're taking a calculated risk when you have a set of irons. That's just how this is, right? Your peripheral vision can help you extrapolate possible problems as far as what's going in front of or behind your target area and that kind of stuff. But once you lined up and once you've committed to that shot, you do not have positive foreground in front of that target. You don't. Okay. And here's the additional thing. With a dot, you fucking do. You do. Now, the point that's made in this is that with a dot, you can't do like you would with a set of irons and scale that and scale it like so to make the holdover, because it comes out of the glass, right? Well, the funny thing is that you can absolutely hold over and see your entire target area because it's mounted higher up off the slide. If you have a dot mounted to a handgun, if you have a handgun with a set of irons, you can actually do both of these, where you stick that dot on that same thing, that same bird feeder that you were looking at before. And the funny thing is, if you keep both eyes open and you superimpose that image in front of your face, the funny thing is that you've got the bird feeder and you've got all kinds of shit below it. And you've got a whole lot of left and right, because this sort of just disappears, right? You can count it as something that is in that target area, but you have much more information. Okay, and here's the additional thing. The additional thing that speaks to the inexperience of people that have stupid shit to say like this. You have no idea when you make a comment like this what the dope of your handgun actually is. Okay, because if you're zeroed at 25, okay, if you're zeroed at 25, your point of aim, point of impact, and it does vary a little bit with ammo, but your point of aim, point of impact out to 100 is relatively the same. Where it changes is very close, you're about 1.5 inches low, and at about 50 yards, you're about 1.5 inches high. That's where your point of impact is. Okay. But these aren't people that will go out and dope these actual distances. And what I consider a reasonable distance for a handgun is from 100 and in. Okay, self-defense shootings, more than a few have happened at 100. And the further, the closer in that you get, obviously the numbers increase significantly. So that roundabout, I'm starting to really lose my effectiveness at a football field. But that covers my most likely all the way out to my very least likely very quickly with 1-0. And you want to know something awesome is that if you dope things out to 2 and 300 and that kind of stuff, you'll figure out stuff like a 200-yard line hold on a dot is like 6 inches high ish. Most of the time, especially if you got like a big ass gong out there for handguns, because most people do, that's mostly at 200 you can just hold dead on and hit that son of a bitch. But you want to hold just a little bit high. And the funny thing is, with a dot on your handgun, you can actually, with the crest of the dot, you can more or less figure out what the center of that gong is and where in reference the crest of your dot, and then where 6 inches high would be with the crest of that dot as well. Far more information, and now you've got an appropriate hold, and also center punch head at 200 yards. Boom. With 300, we're getting kind of squirrely, okay? At 300, it's a lot now. It's a lot because we're holding like a quarter body high. But we can still get a hit, okay? Because now the crest of my dot, let's say I wanted to hit here at 200, I'm holding up here to ensure that. Let's say I wanted to hit down here at 200, and the crest of my dot is up here for 200. Neat, right? If I wanted that hit at 300 now, the crest of my dot is like up here-ish, a little bit more than that. And the funny thing is that if you look at how much fucking window is in here, I still have target foreground, and by the way, that's farther away, so I can see not just the target, not just the feet of the target, but all the way up to like the 50 friggin' yard line. What are you talking about? The big dumb. Okay? And the last one, of course, is very simple. People that get used to dots, they fall apart when they go back to irons. No, you're going to suffer a performance difference because, it's a set of irons. It's not a dot. It's not as good. But I guarantee you'll be faster on those friggin' irons and far more precise than you used to be. You'll just be upset because you're not where you're at with a dot. That's all. Okay? And you'll know these things if you actually use a shot timer. Okay? The next video that I'm going to do on this is actually going to revolve around shot timers and how useful they are for an individual's performance, and it has nothing to do with competition whatsoever. Because a lot of people equate shot timers to Instagram, competition, and guys trying to flex on other people. And that is the wrongest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And again, funny thing is, I used to believe a lot of this shit too. I used to believe a ton of this, honestly. But the difference really is that the more I see that went against what it was that I believed, you question it and you start paying attention. When you start paying attention and seeing real results, it's hard to dispute. And now I'm on the other side of the aisle talking about the big dumb and everything else. This isn't for people that are on the fence or that have particular belief sets or whatever. This is for people that honestly try to say that going over to things like dots on handguns is irresponsible. Okay, that people that teach, dots for concealed carry or dot specific classes for guys and that kind of stuff are just trying to line their wallet, or that are trying to scam people, or that are irresponsible, or that the simple practice itself is dangerous. And the funny thing is that that's absolutely fucking false, number one. And number two, I'm not even talking about me right now. Not at all, okay? Because, yeah, I teach dot stuff, I teach tons of handgun stuff, I teach shot timer stuff, all kinds of shit. I teach a lot of stuff within my own curriculum that is absolutely against all of this nonsense. But now we're starting to talk about people, other guys in the industry, that have made sure that the right people die. And it's not the guys that live here, going out to get taught by them. This is insulting to guys like that. Okay. And here's the thing, it's not just flat out wrong, it's flat earther mentality wrong, because they'll sit there and they'll extrapolate little tiny things that are supposed to make like their whole argument and everything else, right? But it doesn't make sense. It's never made sense. And it's never gonna make sense to anyone that applies even a little bit of critical thought. Okay? Because shit like this, okay? All you had to do was put a dot on a target at distance, CJ. That's all you had to do, was put a dot on a target at distance. And something as simple as the concept of as a holdover with a rifle should have clicked in your head, been like, oh, I can also see tons of other shit, and that should have erased that stupid thought. But no, instead, this fucking idiot is going to sit there and be like, anyone that teaches that is irresponsible. Okay. People fall apart when they go back to irons, and what's hilarious is that it's usually stacked up with reduces overall aptitude. And again, people like this are always going to be like, well, that's your prerogative if you want your students to have less aptitude as far as a handgun and that kind of stuff. You'll notice something. Guys that train their asses off with handguns in general, generally speaking, will listen to people like this. Okay? They'll listen to people like this. And then they'll take their own handgun from them, throw it in their holster, and proceed to ball them up. Because they're not even close to as good. What is required out of you, the individual, to get really good with a dot is far more than is required to be passable with a set of irons. Okay, like there is the attention to detail as far as your individual mechanics, the attention to detail that is required for your hand-eye coordination, which bleeds into your mechanics. How you line up a set of sights, how you control recoil, how you position the gun in your hands over and over and over again, how you drop, how you do something as simple as right at the end of presenting a set of sights with your hands, what exactly happens with those pinkies while you're vicing that handgun into place. The little things that you have to pay attention to just to make sure that you are consistently not fishing for a dot over and over and over again. And then you have sighting systems like an ACSS Vulcan, which help bail you out, which give you even more information because there's a giant goddamn ring letting you know when you're off and exactly where you are off. Because a lot of times guys will fish for the dot and they won't try and think of why or where their dot was, but now they see that feedback and they'll know, okay, I'm consistently pushing this dude high into the left, so I got to correct that a little bit. Little things like that. The amount of training and dedication required to get superb with a dot, okay, it's far more. It's far more. So I don't really understand that. And what's even more hilarious is that I've done this more than once before where I go to like a little local competition, that kind of stuff, and I would shoot exclusively irons, but there's an iron-sighted and a dotted portion of this. And then me and a couple of buddies of mine like Travis and Scott or whatever would show up. We haven't shot an iron-sighted handgun in forever, and we still absolutely destroy the iron-sighted portion of this thing. Like, it makes no sense at all. And it's things that you guys need to be careful of when you're listening to guys make dumbass videos listing stupid garbage like this, because actively advocating that you not improve a system based off of some nonsense is exactly that. It's fucking nonsense. Okay, it's nonsense to the highest degree. So I'm gonna jump off my soapbox here. I think I've done plenty, right? Listen, if you guys want to come out and train with us, you absolutely can. I'm getting ready to list more stuff on the schedule and everything else. For those of you that don't know, I'm still going to Michigan. I'm still going to Pennsylvania. before too terribly long, I'm working on getting back to Florida and Georgia and a few other places that I have in mind. Our vehicle class is still open too. Okay. So, you know, check that out. Listen, I understand that everything is getting a little tighter as far as money is concerned, but the ammo is available now. Okay. It's been available now. So do what you got to do. Listen, I know it's tough, but I haven't stopped. It's been cut down severely, but I haven't stopped, and you shouldn't either, because it's on you. How well you do at this is entirely your fault. Does that make sense? And even if it's not training with me, keeping up your individual skills is probably a good idea. So there's that. Now, if you guys want to support us on Patreon, also, again, wildly appreciated. You guys have done so much for us, it's not even funny, right? And I appreciate everything that you guys do. It allows us to continue to function, and it's great. So there's that. If you guys want to check us out on Facebook, you can do that too. Links for all of this stuff are in the description below. If you want to just peruse around and watch videos and stuff like that here, especially if you hung out with me for an hour talking about idiots, talking about dumb shit with dots, then, you know, I applaud you. But that being said, guys, remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.